Welcome to Man on a Mission.
We could go down this rabbit hole.
We could talk and talk about management consultancy.
I want to talk a little bit about my projects because I think those are things that I can speak in much more detail about.
A disclaimer.
As a disclaimer.
Right. Consultants aren't the be-all, end-all.
Exactly. It's a good question. And so call out to you for that and for that awareness. Yeah.
Today is day one, episode one of a venture that I've been planning for a while now. The general idea behind this podcast is to engage with the brightest minds in India and the world. And there are perhaps very few individuals that shine brighter than my first guest, who happens to be my sister, Anam Vadgama. Anam, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. Now, a quick introduction about you, because the listeners should know why you're here and what categorizes you as one of the most incredible people I've met. So let me just get through this quickly. I've had to cut a lot of it out because there was a lot that you've done in your life, but let me just go over the highlights real quick. All right. So Anam graduated, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is what I have. Anam graduated summa cum laude with a near perfect 3.93 GPA from Princeton University. You studied political science, you have a bachelor's degree, and while you were at Princeton, you were the recipient of the Glickman Award. And I'm not sure if I have this right, but you were either the first international student or the first Indian student that received the award, something along those lines. Am I correct?
Along those lines.
Along those lines, right. Post Princeton, you served as the Mumbai co-chair of the Princeton Club of India. Moving on, Anam has a background in design thinking methodology. That's a big word that we're going to have to break down.
We're going to unpack that.
We have to unpack that because I need it unpacked. And you have worked in the global health and development sector for the Life You Can Save, where you focused on charity evaluation, partnerships, and philanthropic advisory. And lastly, you moved on and joined Iranios to pivot to technology consulting, gaining experience in cloud FinOps, product management, and intercultural collaboration with a focus in the automotive sector.
That's correct.
Right. Now, as of today, you're unemployed and you're considering your options, having gained all your experience in philanthropy and consultancy and, all the avenues that you've explored so far. I know you're flying back to Germany tonight because that's where you live. And I'm glad that you were able to and decided to give me 2 hours of your time, even though I'm your brother and you really didn't have a choice. But I'm glad that you did that. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and good luck on this podcast.
Right, good luck on day one. Right? Who
Day
better
one.
to do it with than with my actual sister?
Excited to be the first person here.
Well, I wouldn't have anyone else, truly. Okay, anyway, there's a lot to unpack. So let's get right to it.
Let's get started.
And I want to start in a reverse chronological order.
Sure.
Because I think that's the freshest in your head, management consultancy. So let's get into that first.
Sure.
All right. The first question, I think this is the most important one when it comes to management consultancy, is what do consultants actually do?
Consultants consult.
That is the most management consultancy answer you'll ever receive, huh?
The second answer is, it depends.
It depends, right? Circumstantial. Put it under the circumstantial semicolon and you're good to go. Right. Now, here's a question. I think I did when I did the research on this, I found that nearly 50% or close to 50% of all Ivy League grads end up going down the management consultancy route. Why is the position so coveted? And why are so many people, there's this aura around management consultancy, right? So can you explain that to someone who is very much out of that space?
Yeah, it's true. A lot of my peers have gone on to management consulting after graduation.
Right.
What's a little different about me is I didn't do it immediately after graduation. I pivoted into it later in my career, and we'll get into that in a bit.
We will get into that.
But first, about the aura and about really what makes it so attractive. It's a very, very exciting space to be in. Because what happens in a management consulting firm, you asked what do consultants do, is businesses come to you with their problems.
Right.
These are often businesses in a range of industries. They could be in the automotive sector, in pharmaceuticals, in aviation, maritime. They come to you with their business problems. There are cases where they come to you with more niche requests. Maybe they need additional capacity, but largely what they're coming to you with is some problem that they cannot solve, either because they need more analytical horsepower, or because they need additional capacity, or they need a fresh set of eyes to look at that problem. And you as a consultant go about and help them solve it. What really makes management consultants unique is they have, especially some of these firms that have been around a long time, is they have seen a large variety of problems in a large number of industries, and they have that problem solving toolkit available to them that they can apply to their different clients' needs. And that, I think, is what makes it very, very exciting for somebody coming out of college to be able to both have that kind of impact so young, right? To work directly with business leaders, with executives, and to solve these problems. But also, it's not just about the impact, it's also about the learnings and the skill set, because you learn so much in each engagement. I had 5 different engagements approximately during my time in consulting.
And what do you mean by engagements? Like different projects that you worked
Different
on?
projects, different clients,
Right.
different projects, yeah.
And that's one of the things that I want to touch on, because really it's the breadth of experience that you get in management consultancy that allows you to springboard off that into pretty much any avenue of the professional world that you want to get into.
Correct.
Right. So you focused predominantly on the automotive sector.
Yeah.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about your experience within that industry, like a little more specifically, and maybe share some thoughts on the clients that you worked with, or while maintaining their confidentiality, of course, or just some of the projects that you worked with and your takeaways from that.
Yeah, so I won't be sharing client details since
Fair
we're
enough.
not able to share those.
Right.
But just generally working in, firstly, just working in corporates, right? In these sorts of large companies with a lot of employees, there are some trends and patterns you see. I will not get into all of them. I'll highlight a few for you to chew on.
Give us the key points, for the listeners.
So one key point, all right, with corporates, one challenge that we see across the board is departments working in silos.
Right.
And this happens as you scale.
Okay.
Each of these departments works as their own little organization. And often in this sort of siloed mentality, there is some sort of loss of understanding that, hey, we are actually one organization. We are X company or Y company. And that really happens as you scale. So that's one challenge that we've seen across the board.
So what I'm hearing is that these big corporations, what they lack is streamlined communication or effective communication.
It's a mix of communication, leadership, incentive structure. I think also a big value add of consultants is breaking these silos.
Right.
And just enabling this communication, this collaboration, also supporting with leadership practices that help break these silos. So that's just one thing to chew on. But there's a lot more that you can unpack as we go along, but I don't want to spend a lot of time.
We could go down this rabbit hole.
We could go down this rabbit hole.
We could talk about management consultancy, right?
This is one thing that stood across to me across all my clients. I want to talk a little bit about my projects, because I think those are things that I can speak in much more detail about, and you can follow up with questions.
No, and I'm glad you're talking about the projects, because that way we get specific insights. And I think that's important.
Yeah, instead of giving general trends and takeaways,
right.
Let me share with you some specific projects so that you get a sense of what it is that we do. So one of my first projects, and this was also one of my most exciting projects, was Cloud FinOps.
Cloud FinOps
was one of my projects. It was basically, currently, what you're seeing is cloud spend of large organizations going out of control. And this client came to us and said, hey, what do we do about that? Okay. And the approach to helping them work through that was FinOps, which is a operations framework. It's a cultural practice that helps maximize the value of the cloud.
Right.
And this is a big change from historical patterns of how IT spend was thought about and allocated. But what I want you to think about, or what I want listeners to think about, is when you talk about FinOps, it's not about reducing cloud spend. It's about getting the maximum value out of the cloud. It involves a radical change in the way different departments collaborate. So historically, you have a lot of silos between procurement, finance, IT, right? The engineers, all of them are in their silos making decisions. You have large capex costs, whereas in cloud, you are shifting to a variable spend model.
Right.
And that involves a change in thinking. It's actually it's cultural change, because what you want is not what you cannot have is not a one-time decision, but you want engineers day-to-day making decisions that through their daily actions result in maximizing the value of the cloud.
I see what you mean.
And this is without really getting into the details of how we did it and the different techniques of doing it. But that's one very exciting challenge that we came across.
Well, you're talking about optimization, right? That's what consultants do. They optimize.
We optimize. What's really exciting about this project is it involved a lot of change in perspective, in terms of how we thought would help the client solve their problem.
Right.
The client initially was interested in a one-time fix.
Okay.
An instant, say, X% reduction in their cloud cost, in their cloud bill, which of course is possible through certain techniques, which we did share.
Right.
But what's really interesting about this variable spend model of the cloud is you need to make these decisions daily on a recurring basis. So a one-time shift, a one-time cut you can get, but the cloud spend will creep back up. And so what we focused on, in addition to some of the technical considerations, was change management and bringing a cultural change in how the different departments were collaborating and how they were thinking of cloud spend. So this is one example of a project and just some of the challenges that I tackled.
Now, something that is fascinating to me, and this is along these lines, is obviously you're an accomplished person, we know that. Why would a 50-year-old CEO or a 60-year-old CEO with 30, 40 years of industry experience, why would he listen? Or what credibility do you bring? Or how do you justify your credibility to be able to give advice, as such a young person, relatively young, to, a CEO that's been in the industry for 30 years?
It's a great question.
Right.
It's a great question.
Thanks.
And one that I have also thought about.
Right.
I think there's a couple of things that make consultants quite powerful as a tool. I think also it's important, before getting into the answer to your question, to just have a little bit of a word of caution that consultants aren't the solution to everything. And this is probably a topic of a whole other discussion, but it's important to use consultants in the right way. And to get the maximum value out of consultants, I think it's important to also, for leaders, whoever's hiring them, clients, to know what consultants can do, what they can't do, and how to best get value out of them. So this is sort of laying it out there as a
it's a disclaimer.
Right.
Consultants aren't the be-all, end-all.
Exactly. And it's important also to know what they can be used for, what not, and to empower them correctly when you do hire them. So with that out of the way, why would a CEO or a leader listen to a young consultant?
Let's hit on that.
Let's hit on that. So firstly, what's important to recognize is that while the consultants may be young, often the organization that they work for has been around for a while.
Right.
And they are not acting independently. They are drawing on a lot of years of organizational knowledge. And that's important, because that is passed on to these consultants through mentors, that's passed on through these consultants through their project leads. And so they are working with a lot of support. So that's the first part. The second part is that a lot of the value of consulting comes from being able to see how that problem has been solved across different industries with different clients and apply it to your problems. So while you might be in your organization, say, for many, many years, you've probably lost, or you maybe are not as aware of the internal workings of what's happening around you. And so consultants have been there, solved a lot of different, probably similar problems, more similar than you realize, and they bring that toolkit to help you solve your problem.
So what I'm taking from your answer really is a leveraging of collective experience of an organization.
That is one.
Right.
But there's a second part. And that second part is often something that you see that realization happen in key moments of the project when you share some fresh insight. I think the second is not as much collective knowledge and wisdom as much as it is a fresh set of eyes.
Right.
You have a fresh set of eyes looking at a problem that maybe you've been flooded in for a long time. And somehow that fresh perspective combined with that problem-solving toolkit can create powerful insights that that maybe might have taken you a bit longer to get to. And so that's the power of consultants. Did that answer your question?
It did. I'm sure we could again like dive way deeper
Yeah.
into it. But we are obviously on a time limit, so we need to keep it rolling. But let me ask you this: for someone, a younger individual, maybe my age, a little younger,
Yeah.
who is watching this podcast or listening to someone in your position, and is aspiration or aspires to get to where you are in terms of management consultancy. Can you talk about the path that got you to management consultancy, specifically in terms of the interview and hiring process? Because I think there's a lot of ambiguity about it, and people would benefit from hearing about it from someone who's been on the inside.
100%. 100%. So on the first thing to really lay out is that it's important to spend time getting to know people, to network, to actually build relationships. When I say network, I genuinely mean build authentic relationships. People think of networking as this sleazy sales mentality approach to reaching out to people, and people don't feel good about that. But approach networking in terms of building genuine connections with people at these firms. And that gets you to the point where you may get a referral, because firms would trust a referral coming from somebody working within the firm. And that can be quite powerful in helping you just get past the resume screening stage, the very first stage. Important to highlight that all your connections and networking, while valuable, can only get you to that first point. It's not valuable beyond that. After that, it's all you. So maybe it can land you your first interview. It's valuable. It's valuable for a number of reasons other than getting the job. Maybe in the process of speaking to these people, you realize this job is not for you. And that's powerful too. And so just generally building relationships is a good practice, right? So that gets you to the point where you have an interview. The next step is preparation for the interview and being able to solve the interview. I think it varies firm by firm, but one technique that a lot of consulting firms use to test candidates is something called a case study, which is a business problem that they get you to solve live in that interview, or in some firms they give you some time to figure out the solution, but they give you a problem and you need to solve it. And what I really find powerful about the case study, and there's a lot of resources on case study prep online, is firms try their best to have it mimic the real job that you will do when you are a consultant.
Right.
And so I think it's a powerful way for the firm to figure out if you're a good fit, if you could do well on the job, but it's also a good test for you to figure out, hey, will I like this job if I get in?
Am I the right fit?
Am I the right fit? Is this enjoyable to me?
Is this the right fit for me?
Is this the right fit for me?
It's just as important.
It's just as important.
Right.
And so that's a tool that requires, that's a tool that firms use, and something that will require preparation. But with the right preparation, I think any young person can work through it, develop the skill set, and be able to solve it.
Now you spoke about networking, right, and the importance of networking and building authentic relationships. Again, for someone younger trying to break into consultancy, how do they go about networking? And even that first step of, is it sending emails? Is it finding connections through your own personal relationships? So what does an individual do to begin networking and building their I guess network?
I'm currently at a mid-career stage, and one thing that I want to highlight to young people is it can seem scary in the beginning, but eventually as you just go through life, you build your network with it. So that's important to call out. You don't need to be constantly working on it. Just going through life, doing excellent in whatever work that you are doing, builds a good reputation. It expands your network. It helps you. So just important, even before networking, important to call out, like a big call out here. Focus on just being excellent, on honing your craft, and that's just generally good for you and leads to all kinds of good things happening in your life. Now, in terms of networking, how do you really go about it?
How do you go about
How do you go
networking?
about it, to your question? Start out with people you know. You would be surprised. You have a network, even if you may not fully realize it. Your friends, your family, the relatives of your friends, your extended family. Start out there. They may know people who may know people. Approach them with curiosity.
Right.
That's really important. You're not trying to get something out of them. It's not a transaction. You're approaching them with curiosity. Most people are more than willing to help. Your alumni network can be very powerful. Princeton's alumni network, where I studied, has helped me over and over again. It's just been a question of getting the courage to send out an email.
Right.
Hey, I'm considering a career in X firm. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your experiences in that firm? Most people are more than happy to share. And that's networking. So get this idea out of your head that networking is a transactional relationship where I'm trying to get something out of someone. It's not. Approach it with curiosity, with genuine relationship building, with a genuine relationship building mindset, and
Right.
people will be more than happy to help.
So the point is to create authentic relationships.
Create authentic relationships. That's networking.
Fair enough.
That's
I get that. And I think that makes intuitive sense to someone. And in terms of reaching out and asking people, really comes back to this principle of you never get what you don't ask for.
Correct.
So don't be afraid to ask.
Of course.
Okay, now you've networked. You've gotten your foot into the door. You've done the interview process. You're in. Talk about the work culture
Yeah.
within management consultancy.
Yeah.
And if you could elaborate on the personality traits or the type of individual who is the traits that are more conducive to thriving in that environment.
So I think management consulting requires some very specific skill sets, both that you need at some basic level to even break in, but also that you need to thrive.
Right.
One of them is problem solving, being analytical. That's one. The second is communication. And this communication is very, very important. If you keep in mind some of the complex dynamics of a consultant in a firm, you're not really an employee, right? You're still an outsider, but you're dealing with some very real problems within the company. And so developing the skill set to both communicate with authority and yet humility.
Right.
You really need a mix of both because yes, you do bring a lot to the table, but there's a lot that you don't know.
Right.
And so you really need to balance that out in all of your communication. So problem solving and communication are two worth calling out. The third one worth calling out is being able to know how to learn. You need to be a fast learner. So you need to develop the muscle to be able to jump into different situations and learn very, very quickly about the firm, about the problem at hand. Consulting firms place consultants in engagements where you have limited time to solve client problems and a lot of expectations from the client. You need to be able to roll up your sleeves and be able to learn. And so learning how to learn, something that liberal arts actually does really well, right?
It teaches you how to think.
It teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to learn.
And it teaches you how to communicate.
Exactly.
Right. So
exactly.
it's not a completely pointless degree.
I'm a fan of liberal arts. It is absolutely, I think it can be misunderstood, but I think it's a very, very useful degree. We're both liberal arts.
We are both liberal arts. I think it depends, well, it's circumstantial for one, and it depends on the individual, right? Okay, now to wrap up the management consultancy section of this, because, we have so many other things to talk about. What would you say are your 3 biggest takeaways from your time in the industry?
Number 1, every recommendation should be backed by data.
Okay.
Never say something unless it's backed by data.
Right.
Number 2, it's not sufficient to just be right. While it's important to be right, it's even more important to be right in a client-friendly way. Number 2, so communicate well. And number 3, I would say is go for it. Sometimes you just have to approach new situations with a learning and growth mindset and to trust yourself to be able to solve and succeed in new engagements and new situations that maybe you might not have thought you would find yourself in. And so I think somewhere just develop that muscle to believe in yourself and trust in yourself, because you will sail through it when you're thrown into that environment.
Right. And now I know, because obviously you and I have talked about this, towards the end of your time in management consultancy, you were really contending with, should I leave? Should I stay? What is the next step for me? Do I continue down this path? So what was the final straw that led to, you exiting and, just deciding that management consultancy isn't for me anymore?
So I think there is a little bit of a correction there. When I left my particular company, I wasn't 100% sure if management consultancy was right or wrong for me.
Okay.
What I did know is that I needed some time to reevaluate.
Right.
So that's important. At the time of leaving, I was unsure, and I felt it was important to take some time to figure out what the next career move for me would be.
Right.
In terms of why, I think one thing that I was really struggling with was value alignment. And I think for me personally, it was really important to work in an industry that for me felt value aligned. I think management consultants do great work. I am a big fan. I think it's a fantastic career path for somebody that wants to grow, learn, solve exciting problems. For me personally, I felt like something was missing. As soon as I felt that, I acted on it. I have a bias for action, as you know.
You do.
I do have a bias for action. And so I acted on it, and I decided to take some time off to dig into that feeling of, hey, what are my values? To spend some time thinking about it and to figure out what was that piece that was missing, and then to act upon it based on my discovery.
And how much of a role, because we all know that management consultancy, the hours are rigorous.
Yeah.
And I've seen you work long hours.
Yeah.
So, well, before we move on, talk about a typical day in terms of, what do interactions with your colleagues look like?
Yeah.
How long does a typical day last, like morning to night? And how much of a role that has in, making an individual feel burnt out?
Yeah. I think you also touched on this in your work culture question. We just didn't get the chance to elaborate.
Right.
But I think this is a good opportunity. So
Right.
First, typical day, there is no typical day.
There is no
Consultant
typical day.
answer, it depends. It depends on
It's
the
all
project.
circumstantial. The amount of times we're going to hear that.
It
Man.
depends.
We should have a standing count in this episode of it's circumstantial.
It depends.
Right, it depends.
But genuinely, it depends client to client, because you have different client engagements, and it varies based on the project, the specific deliverables that were promised, and the time in which it was promised. And it varies a little bit firm by firm. That being said, most days are long. There were times when I started at 8:30, ended at midnight, sometimes later.
Right.
There were times, however, that were more normal work day. You completed within 8 hours. And so it was quite cyclical. But that being said, there were often long early mornings, late nights, a lot of travel. My recent trip, I was traveling for 6 weeks. 6 weeks I was in a hotel,
Right.
and that was normal. That was typical.
It's just typical for
It's
the
typical.
industry.
So I think, I would say the short version of the answer is it depends, but generally expect long hours, a lot of long hours, a lot of hard work, a lot of early mornings, late nights, and a lot of travel. In terms of, did that play a role in me leaving the management consulting? Yes and no. I would say yes, it did. Of course, at some point you want to balance family, you want to balance your hobbies, you want to have all of that. So yeah, from that perspective, it was a factor, but you'd be surprised to hear it wasn't the biggest factor.
Right.
So for me, I'm okay with working long hours. I am okay with spending a lot of, a lot of time doing work, I think that comes with part of the job. I think firms need to not make that the norm.
Right.
And we can talk more about my views on work culture. I think it's firms' responsibility to make sure that their employees have work-life balance.
100%.
Yes, I think a lot of firms are getting better at it.
Well, I'm an employer myself. You know this. We employ people.
Yeah.
And I have found that the best way to maximize output of any employee is to not manage the employee. You're not managing an accountant or a project manager.
Yeah.
You're managing the man or woman behind the role. So you want your employees to be happy. You want them to feel a sense of purpose in the work, because otherwise, even as an employer, you won't be able to get the best out of that. And that's been my experience. I'm sure that that's been your learning as well.
100%.
Right.
But coming back to your question of why did I leave, I think it was so again, the disclaimer. I like to leave disclaimers because it's important for me in such a public forum to share that I think employers need to do a better job of making sure their employees have work-life balance. But that being said, I also work pretty long hours in the nonprofit sector. That's also important to call out.
We're going to move on to that in a second.
And so my reason for leaving was not the long hours per se, although I did find them to be quite much and quite intense at times, challenging, but that's part of the job. It was more a value alignment. A value alignment question that I am still working through.
Fair enough. Yeah. It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress.
And you just touched on the non-profit sector. I want to get into it because I know you, I'm your brother, and I know that if there is one thing you're passionate about, it is giving back and generally making the world a better place. I know that sounds cliche, but that is who you are.
Correct.
And that is your real passion. Let's be real.
The number of times you've tried to poach me into real estate.
Dude, I've tried to poach you 100 times, man. It's a lifelong struggle. Hopefully someday it comes true and we work together. But if not, you'll be busy doing, big important things. So, I'm sure you're going to be fine regardless. Now, when you graduated Princeton, I think you graduated in 2018.
I did.
You were summa cum laude. 3.93 GPA. That's near perfect. I've seen your transcript and it looks unreal because there's only A's. I don't think there's a B. Right? There's not that's some freaky stuff. But you graduated basically one of the most valuable grads, right, in 2018 in the world, because you're the creme de la creme of Princeton, which is the creme de la creme of universities. So of all the avenues you could go down after Princeton, why opt for the nonprofit space?
It's a good question. And I also like how you are, I think it shows just the way you phrase the question. I like that it shows your awareness about how difficult and complex nonprofit work can be. And so call out to you for that awareness. Yeah. I feel nonprofit work is often misunderstood with people who haven't engaged much with the sector. So firstly, nonprofit work is as complex, as challenging, in many ways even more challenging than some of the work that I was doing in consulting, for example, right? It has its own set of challenges. It is
that's a thumbnail right there. Non-profit is more challenging than consulting.
Some parts of it, yes. Some parts of it, 100%. And that's important to keep in mind because you are solving what you call wicked problems. Problems with no easy solution, right? They really require a lot of thinking. Great minds have tried to solve these problems and they continue to put their minds to it. And so it's just important to call out how complex some of these challenges that nonprofits solve are. In terms of why I got into the nonprofit sector immediately after graduation is because that was my calling.
Right.
I really felt that. It was important for me to give back to society, and we'll talk a little bit about growing up and what drives me to give back to society. What's really interesting, and that this might be interesting for your listeners to hear about, is when I graduated, I wasn't planning on getting into nonprofit.
Really?
No.
I don't think even I was aware of that.
I was planning to get into the Indian civil services.
Yes, I think you were contemplating whether you should go down that path.
Yes, and so that was...
And that's not an easy path either.
That's not an easy path either.
Easy path, right.
So I actually graduated Princeton thinking I would get into the Indian civil services to make a difference to society. My calling was always to give back, to use the education, to use the skill set to contribute to society in some meaningful way. I discovered after graduation that this was not a path I wanted to pursue. The reasons were some obvious ones like corruption, which we are aware of, which I am sure you experience intimately in your work in real estate.
Right.
But the other issue was the firefighting. So I wanted to get into the civil services to make a difference. But when I spoke to people in their positions, of course, they made a lot of difference. And I still believe the government is one of the most, if not the most powerful tool to change the lives of many, many people. What happened was, instead of doing impactful work and dedicating their mind to impactful work, a lot of what happened was one political fire came up, they doused it.
Right.
Another political fire came up, they doused it. And so a lot of their bandwidth was going in firefighting. And at some point I realized that, hey, this combination of corruption and firefighting does not sit well with me. And over a long career of many, many years, I do not see myself thriving. And so it was both of these reasons due to which I said, hey, we live in an exciting time. It's possible to make a huge amount of impact outside of the government.
Right.
Although I still believe the government, like, respect to all of the great officers who are working day in and day out to make India better, to make the world better. And I moved over to the nonprofit sector.
And we know a few of them personally.
We do.
Right? And they do great work. I'm going to get a couple of them on the podcast because, like, the lessons that they have, from the on-ground practical
the field,
experience is like nothing else.
Yeah. And they're working with incredible constraints, and they are
really
still
do.
fighting
because
through.
The bureaucracy is like, it does stifle effectiveness, but this is the system, and but we have to work within the system while trying to improve it. Okay, now you worked with the Life You Can Save, right? With Mr. Peter Singer, who I have had the privilege of meeting my time in Princeton when I helped you move out.
Yes, thank you.
Tell me a little bit about working with him, because he is a pretty big name in the nonprofit space.
Yeah.
And what was it like working with him and, the organization Life You Can Save as a whole?
Peter Singer is somebody who was the guiding philosopher. So he's extremely influential. Currently, considered the world's most influential living philosopher. Legend, right? He is an extremely well-known personality, but in person he is very humble, very kind, and so working with him was a delight. He was so approachable. You can talk to him. You've met him. You can approach him. You can talk with him. You can discuss with him. Very open-minded.
He's not uptight like other academics can sometimes be.
He's just him. He's a wonderful human being, very, very real, very authentic. And so I think he's a joy to work with. That being said, he wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations of the Life You Can Save. And so while he was providing a lot of the vision and the general guidance to the organization, day-to-day operational work at the Life You Can Save, except for, certain key moments when we reached out to him for his support or for his presence or for a talk. For example, when we relaunched the Life You Can Save book as an organization, we reached out to him, but generally the operational work was different and was done by the team, by our then executive director, Charlie Bressler, our next executive director, Ricard. And so that was the team that was doing a lot of the day-to-day work.
Right.
Working for the Life You Can Save, it was a blast. I think the Life You Can Save sets a very high standard for how employers should be, and I am so glad that was my experience. Right, coming out of college, working for that kind of organization, because they were great. They had, I'll give you an example. They had unlimited vacation policy. You were trusted to take as many vacations as you needed, and you just had to inform the team. There were, of course, guidelines like, hey, let the team know beforehand. Maybe don't take vacations when you have a big event coming where you're really, really needed. But I can confirm that it was quite flexible. And they really respected your autonomy. So that was great. It was a fully remote team. So we were all working 100% remote. I was sitting in India while working for them. My executive, Ricard at the time, when he became executive director, was sitting in Australia. My director of research was switching between US and Pakistan. My director of marketing was in South Africa, director of partnerships in UK, East Coast, West Coast. Our chief technology officer was in Costa Rica. And we all worked remotely. And I think that kind of work requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of autonomy. And it requires good leadership. And I think the Life You Can Save had that. So I think it was a very special environment to be working in. But importantly, the reason why I joined it and the reason why I stayed in it was the impact.
The impact.
The work that you did there was incredibly impactful. And that was what gave my day-to-day a lot of meaning, a lot of joy. I woke up excited. I woke up on Mondays happy to really be doing something that makes some positive difference in the world. And so that was, I think in the end, that was what was really the charm of the Life You Can Save. It was a wonderful organization. I hope I've touched on your different aspects. Peter Singer, the work culture, and then just the impact.
I was just wanted to point out, there's a smile on your face when you talk about the Life You Can Save and giving back. That just isn't there when you talk about management consultancy. I hate to say it. So if you want to follow your passion, do not. I mean, unless that is your passion, but to each their own, different strokes. Now, hold on. Let me get back to it. I just lost my train of thought. Okay. Everything at Life You Can Save is about impact, right?
Yeah.
While you were there, you evaluated charities, or you worked on creating a framework that evaluated charities.
Yeah.
What is that framework that you used, and why is it important to evaluate charities?
That's a big question, and will take a couple of hours to get to the bottom of. So let me give you the highlights. Let me give you the highlights. So in terms of my role at the Life You Can Save, just hitting on that a little bit for the audience, I was involved in partnerships, philanthropic advisory, and then did charity evaluation at the Life You Can Save. So those were the hats that I wore while I was in the organization. Zooming into charity evaluation, I think even before getting into the framework, it's important to outline, to give a bit of an introduction to this idea of effective giving, because I think that may be an idea not many are familiar with. So usually when you invest your stocks, you think of your ROI, correct?
Right.
When you buy something, when you buy a car, a laptop, you think of the price, right? When you use numbers, you use analyses for a lot of your decisions. Unfortunately, when a lot of people give to charity, they don't put their thinking, their analytical mind, any kind of comparison into their charitable decisions.
Right.
They give based on emotion.
Right.
They give based on seeing a picture of maybe some person who is in need. They give based on, hey, my family suffered from this disease, so I'll give to this cause. Hey, my mom recommended this nonprofit, I'll give to this cause. And so the kind of analyses and reason that you give to all aspects of your life, a lot of people for some reason don't give it to their philanthropic decision making. The big idea behind the Life You Can Save is, hey, and this is a very simplified idea, like, hey, if you can save 100, say with your 10,000 rupees, right, you can improve 100 lives in NGO X, but you can improve 1,000 lives in NGO Y. Give it to NGO Y.
Right.
That is the idea. To just generally have more analyses in your giving decisions, same as you have in all other areas of your life. So this is the why for charity evaluation, right? That, hey, you're shortchanging yourself, let alone the people you're trying to help, if you're not giving to the place that actually makes a difference. And give where you'll have the greatest impact per rupee, dollar, euro donated, as opposed to a place that just feels right. Now, there's a couple of layers to this. And I'll talk about two different layers of charity evaluation. The first, very basic layer is you want to make sure you're not giving to a fraud charity, right? You want to, and that we've seen in India, we've seen a lot of nonprofits that aren't really doing the things that they say they're doing. And so that's a very basic level of evaluation.
So this is a problem in India.
Yeah.
Fraudulent non-profits.
This is a problem anywhere.
Okay.
You want to make sure you're giving to a charity that's actually doing good. It's a small minority, right? But this is where people think, what people think about when they think about charity evaluation. They just want to make sure they're giving to a legitimate organization. It's of course very, very few, a small minority. The majority of charities doing great work. But most people, when they think of charity evaluation, they stop there. But here, what we're talking about in the Life You Can Save is actually going one level further and comparing two good charities. So most people, when they think of evaluation, they are thinking of comparing one good and one fraud charity, for example. As long as the charity is legitimate, they'll donate. At the Life You Can Save, what we did was we looked at good charities and said, hey, between these good charities, what can result in the greatest impact per dollar, rupee, or pound donated? So that's the why of charity evaluation.
Right.
Now, your question of how. To answer the how, it's important to understand what we mean by charity evaluation and just some of the nuances of charity evaluation. In the finance world, it's very easy to compare different organizations because you have common metrics. Rupees, dollars, euros, you're comparing them. They're apples to apples. In the charity world, what's really challenging, and this is all context setting, is that you're comparing very different things. You're comparing something like education to improving a child's vision, to improving an old person's vision, to increasing income, to empowering women, to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so metrics don't translate across cause areas. And that's a fundamental challenge of charity evaluation. And that's part of what we were looking to solve through this charity evaluation vertical. I hope I've provided some context. I hope that this was helpful because I think a lot of people don't fully recognize the nuances of charity evaluation when they think about it. And so I wanted to lay that out.
No, I get that. I understand that. Intuitively, it makes sense because how do you compare the impact of having 100, say, malaria mosquito nets to, providing food for 1,000 children in the morning? So it's very hard to quantify the two, but that's the work that you're doing and it's groundbreaking stuff.
Yes. And now about the framework itself, I won't get into a lot of details, but we generally looked at a couple of different aspects when we were evaluating charities. It was a very intensive process. So in terms of the aspects that we looked at the problem, right? Is the problem large enough in scale? Is it tractable? Meaning, can it be plausibly mitigated with the right kind of solutions? Is it neglected? We looked at the problem that the charity was trying to solve. We looked at the specific intervention that the charity was implementing, and we looked at the charity itself.
Right.
This analysis involved looking at a lot of scientific literature and scientific studies about the impact of different interventions, a lot of data, right? So looking at the broader scientific literature. It also involved looking at the specific charities' numbers. And then, of course, speaking to charity representatives. And so this is a bit of a summary of the process, which I hope is helpful.
So one last thing before we move on from the nonprofit space. For someone sitting on some money today, thinking about where they should put that money or which organizations they should give that money to, who do you, Anam Vadgama, recommend they give that money to?
So it's important to note, disclaimer again, that just because I'm going to list some organizations right now in response to your question, but just because an organization is not on my list, it doesn't mean that they're not effective. It just means that maybe I've not come across them in my research, I haven't had the chance, or my former organization, the Life You Can Save, hasn't had a chance to evaluate them. But that being said, with this disclaimer out of the way, I know there are some nonprofits working in India that are doing effective work that my former organization has evaluated. One of them is Educate Girls, one of them is Breakthrough Trust, and the third one is Seva Foundation. These are three organizations that are, I believe, currently on the Life You Can Save's list. Also, I know teaching at the right level has a lot of good evidence behind it, and so organizations using that intervention might be something for listeners to consider donating to.
Well, so if you have money, this is where you should direct some of those funds, huh?
Absolutely.
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 All right. Now like I said, we're going in reverse chronological order. We just did management consultancy. finished The Life You Can Save. I want to move on to Princeton. Again, a lot of people listening to this, especially the younger crowd, Princeton is an aspirational thing. And for someone like me, as well as I did in school, it was out of reach for me. It is really for the most exceptional of students. We know that. And it takes a mountain to climb to get to Princeton. I know this was a few years ago now.
Yeah.
But what do you remember from the application process, from the interview process? And are there any highlights that have stuck with you through that journey?
Honestly, from that time, I remember focusing on, and this sounds so cliche, but focusing on things that I really, really was passionate about, things that I enjoyed. I was taking courses. I was in the IB program at the time. I was taking courses that I really, really enjoyed. I was following different hobbies that I was really passionate about. For example, theater. I was doing some social impactful work, social impact work at the time, of course, in my own capacity that I was really passionate about. And so I think this is also important because now times have flipped and I'm actually interviewing applicants that are applying to Princeton.
So you're interviewing hopeful Princeton students?
Yes, correct. A lot of alumni have that opportunity.
They've given you that responsibility.
Yes, they trust alumni can volunteer and they can interview prospective candidates.
Right.
And now when I think back to my time, one thing that I attribute to being successful through that process is being very authentic and genuinely doing things that I truly believed in, that I truly cared about. The other thing that I remember, and this is true not just for the academic, my academic career, but also for the professional career, I think what really helps there is to be in pursuit of excellence. Excellence at all costs. And that was something that has guided me. That's been a common thread, both before Princeton, at Princeton, after Princeton, whatever you take on, whether that's a course, right? Back in school days, I was taking different courses. I remember it was some chemistry and some math. And I remember being truly engaged in the material and being really, really wanting to understand it with depth, not just for the sake of grades, for the sake of marks, but truly becoming excellent at that material that I was given to learn for whatever coursework that was. Similarly, different interests, different passions, really following where my curiosity led me. And so I would say a combination of a lot of hard work, a pursuit of excellence, and following your curiosity and passions is what I remember as being highlights of my time.
Now, if I remember correctly, for your board exams, I think you scored a 96% or a 97%. This is in the 10th grade.
Yeah.
And then you obviously moved on to BD Somani, where, again, I'm sure you had some, unbelievable GPA. Do you remember what that GPA was? I know that because I have a lot of friends that go to or went to BD. And even after you graduated, Don Gardner, I think, was the principal at the time, apparently loves you so much. So clearly you were an exception.
He's a great principal.
We'll shout out Don Gardner.
Shout out to Don.
Shout out to Don Gardner. But yeah, I remember my friends telling me, and I'm 3 years younger than you, they telling me about how, we know your sister's a genius, and the teachers and the professors can't stop talking about her. So I guess that is the level of excellence it takes, to be a Princeton.
I was very hardworking.
You were very hardworking,
hard.
And not just the
and
academics.
Still am.
Not just the academics, the extracurriculars as well. So can you talk about the importance of being a well-rounded applicant to get into a school like that?
Here, this is a good question because I think when I did what I did at the time I did, I was going against common wisdom of what it means to be a good student. When I moved from 10th grade to BD Somani, I had no intention of applying to Princeton. At that point, it wasn't even a thought to go to the USA. And so what I find especially powerful is when I was doing all of these things, I was doing them against, at that time, what was known as common wisdom in India.
Conventional
wisdom, yes, right. Conventional wisdom in India. So at the time, the mentality in our family was focused on studies. All of these other things may not help. They are they may not be super relevant.
The extracurriculars,
the theater, the social work. But what I did at the time was what I said some moments ago, was follow my curiosity and follow my passions. And so I think that also has resulted in a level of authenticity in the sorts of activities I took up. Because when I took them up, I did not know that they would eventually end up being such an important part of my Princeton application, because at the time of doing them, I was not planning to go to USA. I was planning to stay in the Indian system, probably go to a college in India. And so I'm really glad that worked out. And somehow I think that also helped at the time my application to shine through, because I genuinely did them for the right reasons, although I think that's, there is no real right and wrong, but I did do them for true intrinsic motivations. And I was very intrinsically driven to do them. And so about these extracurriculars, so that's about their role in the specific application process. But I think these extracurriculars have an important role beyond the application process, which is that they just make you a well-rounded human being. I think the things that I have learned from theater in terms of teamwork, you're working with other actors, you're working with other professionals, you need to work as a cohesive unit, right? About collaboration, about creativity. I learned that outside the class. And of course, while they may have helped in my application, they certainly did, they made me a better human being, a better team player that has returns on my professional life even today.
Even
today. We talk about social impact work, right? That has taught me about leadership, right? Being able to go into these different communities and do work to help young girls at the time. That taught me a lot about leadership. That taught me a lot about people. These are values that I take with me today in the professional sector. And so I think when you're zoomed out a little bit, especially now that I'm looking at it in hindsight, I see it as well in a much more holistic way, that yes, it helped my application. Although at the time it help my application without intending to.
Right.
And also its importance beyond the pure application process.
Right. One thing that you touched on here, and I can draw parallels to that from my own life. You spoke about the importance or the lessons you learned from acting and drama, working with a team. I think the same parallels can be drawn to football. I played a lot of football in my life. And that collaboration at that young age, with people with different ideas, bringing your team together, so important.
So important.
And another thing that you said on, and I just want to reiterate for, an aspirational Princeton student and someone going through that process right now. Yes, your academics are very important, but make sure, you have the other aspects, also taken care of, because you're not just a student, right? You're also an individual. Polish the person behind the student, right? Is the lesson I've really taken.
Exactly.
And excellence in everything you do.
Correct.
Because that is what it takes to become or to get to Princeton.
Correct. And it helps you in your life beyond.
It helps you in your life.
It just helps you as a person.
It's just a good way to live.
I think it makes you an interesting person. It makes you, it gives a new dimension to your personality. It opens your mind. It's a good thing.
Okay, now we've spoken about your path to Princeton. And again, it's one thing to talk about hard work. It's another to see it happen. I've seen it happen. But what I haven't seen and what you can talk about is thriving within the Princeton environment, right? Because yes, now you've gotten inside, you're on campus. It's beautiful campus. I've been there many times. What is it like and what does it take to thrive in that environment? Because it's a high pressure environment and now you're not the only brilliant student there. Everyone's brilliant, right? Well, most people, some of them, I'm sure. But what does it take to thrive in that high pressure environment of Princeton?
You'll hear a lot of repeats based on what I have said before. But the two things hold true: pursuit of excellence and genuine curiosity. I think both of those really hold true. And to that, I would add a third one, which is to seek for help when you need it. So when you combine those three, and I can elaborate a little bit on the third, because the first two we did speak about a little bit. Seek for help when you need it, because Princeton University has an ecosystem of support available to all students. And there are professors, the best of their field, available for office hours with you. They're available to discuss and debate questions with you. You have your peers, your classmates, brilliant minds who are more than willing to work together with you in problem solving and figuring out your coursework and working with you on questions that you find challenging. So I would say the third aspect, in addition to curiosity and pursuit of excellence, is get help. When you need it. Don't be afraid to ask.
So we've really come full circle because we spoke about networking earlier.
Yes.
The importance
Correct.
of asking for
Correct.
things and not being afraid to ask, but with
Yes.
humility.
Yes.
So those are all things that we've just come full circle.
They're common threads, true.
And what I picked up on from what you said is the path it takes to get there, right? Or the effort it takes to get there is the same effort it takes to stay there and to thrive in that environment.
100%.
Right.
100%.
Now, I remember I have this memory, and I'm so excited that we finally got into it, is of this infamous, but he's a big name, college counselor, I think that's what you call them, who at the time of your application process, when you were at BD, I think you had a meeting with him, and he vehemently suggested that you do not apply to Princeton, that you would be wasting your time. So can you tell me a little bit about how that felt at that time, to have that, that rejection in a way, and the importance of sometimes not listening to other people's opinions, even though they might be educated, and going with your gut?
Yes. The funny thing is, at the time when he said that, in my head I was thinking he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'm also surprised many years later, how did I think that? I don't know why I thought that or what made me think that at the time, but I think somewhere, and I think this goes on to just over time building your own confidence and your own abilities in yourself. Yes, I was told not to apply to Princeton. I was told not to apply to Ivy Leagues. I was told I don't have a chance. Historically, nobody from our family, this, has been, and we can talk about our family background in a bit.
Certainly haven't been to an Ivy League school in America.
And has not studied in the United States either.
Right.
And so we are, it was, of course, at the time I was, I think my reaction at the time was just, oh God, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to go ahead and do what I know means something to me and something that I believe I have a good shot at reaching. And so I followed my own sense of self-belief, my sense of self-worth. And I think I'm so glad I did.
Right.
I think at some point, and this is true both when you're young and when you are much older, it becomes even more applicable. You need to learn to listen to different perspectives, truly listen to them. You don't want to shut out any perspective, but also you want to be able to then make sure to weed out what's actually useful to you and what you can actually apply to your life. And so with this particular college counselor, maybe there were a couple of things that he said that gave me something to chew on. But there was this one thing that he said that I disagreed with, which was don't apply to Princeton or don't apply to these Ivy Leagues, apply to this other list of colleges, which I just said, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Of course, I'm going to apply because this is my dream college. So I'm going to apply there, of course. And I went ahead and I did that. And I'm glad I did.
I'm glad you did also because, I'm benefiting from your Princeton, your time at Princeton. But do you remember exactly the conversation, or do you just remember it, in fragmented ways? Like you were in his office and, you gave him your list of this is where I want to apply. And what did he say? What was that like? And how did it feel to hear that?
The thing is, I remember the feeling as just being, like I said, I'm going to go, I've heard him, I'm going to go ahead and do what feels right to me.
And that highlights the importance of sometimes you have to go with your gut.
Yes. I think what's important to really remember is at the time that moment didn't feel particularly big to me. I had, at the time, that was just a passing comment by somebody that I decided to ignore. It's only many years later that I reflected, and I'm glad that at that point, I didn't really perceive that moment as being particularly significant and career shifting, because had I perceived it that way, I may not have applied. And so I'm I think what stood out to me in hindsight was just this burning sense of belief, this burning sense of ambition. True, right? I want to go to Princeton. And this burning sense of I'm going to do my best to apply to get there, even if there are people who think that you don't want, you shouldn't be applying, or you shouldn't be going there. And so that's what I remember about the time. I don't remember his comment as much in that particular interaction very vividly, other than just the recommendation to not apply. But what I do remember at that point was that my desire for a good education was all consuming. That's what I remember. And not so much his particular comments in that conversation.
Right. And just to, elaborate on that a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm pretty sure I have this right, after him telling you do not apply to Princeton or any of the Ivies, you went ahead and applied to them. And you got into Princeton, Dartmouth, and Columbia.
That's correct.
So, clearly, he wasn't very good at his job, but, that's not for us to pass judgment on.
Each one to his own.
To each their own.
Each one to his own.
Right.
You take what's useful, you leave what's not useful.
Agreed. Okay, now we've covered Princeton in a way that, I feel very good about. It's been eye-opening. It's been fun. I love talking to you and picking your brain. You're like a mentor to me as well. And I just want to say thank you again for sitting down. I know you have a busy day. Even though you're my sister, I know you're flying out to Germany today. You have 100 things to do. I appreciate you coming early in the morning to do this. And I love you. And safe flight back to Germany. I'll see you when you're back.
Good luck on your podcast.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.